All right. All right. So we are recording. Nice to be here with you, Charlie. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. So I guess the goal for this conversation is for us to just talk a little bit about this year, what happened in Pokemon, do a little bit of talk about our personal experiences, what we each think of the hobby this year. And where we think it's going to go in the future. New Year's, I guess, is a good time for both reflection and then also like looking forward. Um, so I guess to start, what do you make of this year? When I
Yeah,
asked
right.
when
I think the
when I
question could just be, what happened?
yeah, like when I ask that question to you, what comes to mind first?
Yeah.
For
Well,
you.
I think that for the hobby, I mean, I think 2020 is going to be a year that we're talking about for the next decade. I think that this has been one of the most pivotal years for the hobby, and I think that a lot of what happened has a lot to it. I think that we've seen a lot of growth and we've seen a lot of speculation, and I think that naturally everybody looks to coronavirus to explain everything about this year, about 2020. And I don't think that's the whole story when it comes to Pokemon. I think that you know we were on a trajectory anyway, and we had a lot of trends that intersected at a time that just happened to be pivotal, and it did affect it. I mean, it did throw fire on the bonfire here of Pokemon prices. But yeah, I mean, now I'm not even sure that we're in the aftermath. We're definitely at the end of the first phase, but I think that 2021 is going to be a really interesting year too, as we see things. So, just to point to a few factors, I think that we saw this meteoric rise in especially graded WotC and in trophy cards. Trophy cards did not come down. WotC prices came down a little bit, but when you're talking 5x growth and then at the end you lose 20%, I mean, you're still at 4x growth. I mean, it's really just a crazy amount. And I think that we're still seeing a lot of demand, but at the same time, we have grading companies with the slowest turnaround times by a factor of like hundreds of percent, right? Over what we've ever seen for turnarounds. Um, in November of 2019, we were complaining about 4-month turnarounds on bulk, and it could be a year now, easy. I mean, that wouldn't even be far fetched. I mean, I'm not even sure that PSA is touching bulk orders at this point, and I have nothing back since March. So yeah, I mean, I think those are all factors. So I think that if we're going to say what happened, right, I think those are kind of normally the things that happened that people would be talking about in terms of general trends. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that was a great synopsis of so many factors that I'm thinking about. I think where I when I try and predict like what's going to happen next, as all of us are trying to do, really, it's there's so many factors that it makes it so difficult to, with even a little bit of certainty, predict what's going to happen. And I think that for me, it goes to the first point that you were saying. To start with, that is trying to separate the growth of the hobby in terms of collectors that have come from just more awareness of the hobby, which is going to grow the hobby in I believe, a sort of sustainable way, price wise and also interest and with people, versus a shorter term fad of speculating and investing that may come in and out of the hobby. And I think trying to figure out, what percentage of the growth is going to, was from that sort of fad of investors, of speculators who are either trying to look to make a short buck and are more, of a flipper, or are looking to hold these items for who knows how long, or, whatever they're deciding to do. When you see these like companies come in with a lot of money and buy some of the premier cards in the hobby, what are their plans? Are they going to hold these things for 5 years, for 10 years?
Right.
For the foreseeable future? Do they have a price point that they're looking to sell it at? What are they saying? And so and then trying to separate, of course, all the different markets within the hobby, in terms of the high-end trophy markets, high-end set card, type markets, to your, vintage, middle graded vintage market, common uncommon market, to the modern market, which I think is really interesting right now, what's happening in modern. It's a lot to talk about and a lot to predict. I mean, I felt very comfortable saying, as comfortable as I could be saying, like, there's a ton of irrational speculation going on right now over the past couple months. Right. You know what I mean? And it was like there's a lot of prices that don't make sense, particularly on unlimited base commons and uncommon first edition cards from Jungle Fall, like things we were talking about on the channel. And those things have seen very big, 80, 75% retraces on some cards, 80% retraces on some of them. And the lower, the rarer cards, the cards that may have also seen huge growth, but just there aren't as many of them, have held their values a little bit better on average. But interestingly, it's going to be interesting to see if that pattern holds, or if some of those other items start to retrace more. There's something that can happen, I'm sure you've heard of the term a bull trap. Basically, what that means is that you have a bubble, you have it sort of burst at the top, and then it starts to come down, and the more bullish people in the market get really excited and say, okay, now's the time to buy because these items are extremely undervalued. But if those bulls create a little bit of a stability for a while or an uptick, and then they leave, then they run out, there aren't enough of them, and the bears, take over, or the panic sellers take over, it can drive it down much, much, much lower. And to me, like, the trajectory that we were on before all of this, we probably hit at the beginning of the pandemic, and slightly, and a month into the pandemic, in terms of if we were to continue to see sort of like pretty solid, steady, fairly steady, I mean, pretty big growth, but even before the pandemic started. And are we going to come all the way back down to that point where it's not going to come all the way back, but it's going to come back, to where people are really only double their money instead of 5 times their money on a lot of these items? Or is the awareness piece so radically shifted and changed that even a doubling doesn't make sense anymore, because there is so much more collector interest, there is the price memory, all these pieces. So that's the stuff that I don't have answers for. I think that's the right stuff to be thinking about for any person out there and trying to decide what they think is going to happen. And for me, with all that risk, it's sort of like, for me, there's a bit of a hesitance or kind of a wait and see approach happening. But I think that's, you're not going to maximize potentially what you can do by waiting and seeing. So what do you think about all of that? Do you sort of find yourself leaning one way or the other on any of those points? And what are you, I guess, personally, business-wise, what are you thinking in terms of your strategy kind of going into this next year?
Yeah, well, that's a lot. So I don't know if I'll remember every little detail of it, but I definitely, there's a few things I want to say. The first is, I think that we need to manage our expectations. When you say only double our money, as if that's disappointing, when typically in investing, the doubling rate of money is talked about in the realm of a decade. We're talking about months, maybe a year. Like, I think that really this aggressive growth, and I think that's happened since 2016 even, I would say, is like when we've really seen a lot of I would say more people have come in the last 4 years that are in like total, or like that have been in before that, right? Yeah. So the majority of the total people came in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
And that's been a period of extreme growth. And I think that the expectations that have come out of that are in a lot of ways not sustainable long term. I think that there will always be things that make these movements within the Pokemon trading card world, insofar as it remains relevant to global culture, which is a whole nother conversation. But, I think we'll always see movers, right? But I think that the idea that you can buy any Pokemon card and it will double in a few months, that's not a forever thing. It just can't be a forever thing, right? And I think a lot of people realize that. But, I also want to point out that a lot of the sort of analysis that you were pointing to was really maybe perhaps too focused on price. I think that price is something that it's like everybody talks about the prices that are earned. But I don't know that that's necessarily the only, like even the most significant factor when it comes to Pokemon cards and what you should be looking for. I think that in an investment pool where literally the only legitimate investing vehicle is scarcity, we should be looking at changes in supply to inform future price changes as opposed to just looking at short-term price changes. So, when you're talking about a retrace of 80% on these cards, these are a lot of those cards that like did that kind of a retrace were cards where the fundamental supply and the availability of those cards did not change throughout this entire price adventure, right? I mean, these were cards that were available the entire time. If you want PSA 7 and 8 unlimited base set and fossil and jungle, you're going to have that. You're going to have that for a very, very, very long time. And, even if you look at, sports cards, I think is what behaves the most similarly. I know that before 2016, the popular comparison was to draw between Pokemon and Magic. I think that we're finally past that. I completely disagreed with those comparisons. But I do think sports cards are a lot more similar. And maybe art is the most similar, but that's a little bit tough. I don't think a lot of people have a lot of experience there. So, but I'll stick to sports cards too. When you look at these popular players, LeBron James is an easy one. There are a lot of LeBron James cards out there, and all of them have some value, and all of them move, and they make these movements. But really, you have a core few that are higher grade, higher rarity, that are capturing the majority of the headlines. These prices are more dramatic. The results are more dramatic, in terms of investability. Really, anybody that's putting maybe millions of dollars into it, or maybe even hundreds of thousands, is really, looking at a very core select few cards. I think that Pokemon is sort of the same way, where I think we're very quick to draw like WotC as like a group, when in reality there is like a lot of layers within WotC, and there are very specific cards. First edition base set holos are on a different level, and then behind that, you have perhaps some of the harder to get like lower pop Neo Hollows, and you also have some of the lower pop Jungle Fossil stuff, So I think that what we've seen is that like with that core group, with what is mostly available, the unlimited versus first edition, and near mint instead of mint, and those types of things, where it's kind of falling short a little bit. The retrace is less surprising. I mean, that's something where you have a lot of supply, and again, we're talking about strictly a scarcity driven environment, right? So, but have we seen the supply recover on some of these rarer cards? I mean, a few years ago, if you wanted a PSA 10 first edition base set Charizard, despite the fact that the pop is low 100s, you could get one. You just had to pay up. And even if you had to pay up, I mean, you were talking about setting a new record at $40,000, for a card that just sold this month for $350,000.
Or you could get that beat up one for whatever, 30,000 that was sitting on eBay forever, if you remember that.
Yeah, I remember that for sure. Yeah, that was rough. Yeah, I remember it was like the PSA 10s were kind of like disappearing, and there were no opportunities for a while, and everybody was like, "Well, at least I'm not buying that one,"
Yeah, I was like, who's going to be the guy to buy the one where the guy won't show the picture on the back? And
absolutely. But at the same time, this last PWCC, or I think it was technically 2 PWCC blocks ago now, the first wave of the December blocks that they were like advertising. You had a PSA 9 and a PSA 10 Master Scroll, and the PSA 10 Scroll was in trash condition, absolutely disgusting. Yeah. And it got snapped up. Was it like 16,000? I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was around that area, which is low for a 10, but not that low. And that's like half the price of, PSA 10 first edition base set Charizard for 30,000, right? You would think that would not sit forever, but in this environment, people are definitely like snapping up those cards because they see opportunity, even when they know it's illegitimate, because the 9 was like nearly flawless. It was a proper 9. It had like one nick on it, a single nick. It was like in great condition, and it did like 10,000 less, or 6,000 or 7,000, just a lot less than the 10 that was maybe a 7 in reality if you regraded it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
It's
those like types of buys make me more anxious about buying in this type of market. When high end, when people with a lot of money are spending lots of money on things, and it just seems very like haphazard. And I've talked to people throwing around $250,000, and they just found out about a card and they're dropping that much. And they talked to like one or two people about it who like own them probably and may, I'm not saying they didn't give them good information, but it's that all of that is odd to me. And I do think that part of it is there's a like a young influencer culture in Pokemon right now, where there are a lot of people who are so cash rich through being entertainers or influencers or other sorts of things, YouTubers, whatever it is, that like they were willing to spend like crazy amounts of money very quickly, in part because they then showcased these things on their channels and they made all the money back, just through views. I mean,
it's almost like two different types of people, because the guy being stupid with 250K is not the big names that came in. The big names that came in were very calculated, very careful, right? So
yeah, I mean, it's calculated in the sense that it's and I'm not talking about like Logan Paul specifically here, but just there were lots and lots of people, and it's calculated in the sense that they could make content and make all that money back and probably grow their audience. So in that sense, absolutely calculated. Not calculated in terms of like the card itself should or will sustain its value or be worth this much. And so
I mean, I think $150,000 purchase on a PSA 10 first base Charizard turned out okay. Like I think even when it does come out of the box, maybe they were, and the first base boxes that were broken have all gone up except for the one that was legitimate. I mean, I don't even know if that was a real story, right? I mean, you never know with these people, but yeah, I mean, I think that in a lot of cases, part of their act is the carelessness about it, and they pretend to be careless, and they use that to entice people who really are careless with their money to make financial investments that benefit them in the short run. So, or not the person spending, but the entertainer. I think that there's something there about that. And I think we've seen that in sports. We've seen that in non-sports. We've seen that in merch. We've seen that in esports. I mean, there's like a lot of these sort of younger targeted arenas of investment that, cryptocurrency has definitely seen its fair share of using, a face to encourage people to make careless decisions that, are very specifically targeted to enrich an individual. So,
yeah. I mean, just to throw it out there, like I wouldn't be surprised if the first edition Charizard comes back to $80,000. The PSA 10. And that right now, I'm probably the only person saying that. But to me, it's odd that people think that couldn't happen, because we've seen that happen in other high-end markets, comic books, sports cards, where what happens is these extreme periods happen of intense growth, of intense interest, of intense speculation. And what happens is nobody wants to sell because of greed. So when everyone still thinks it's going up, you don't see that many come on the market. I mean, I talked to 5 or 6 people this year who were like, I should probably sell it, but I'm afraid it'll keep going up. So there's this type of mindset. And what happens on the way down is it's often easier. It's painful to sell, but it's often easier to sell somewhere in the middle, particularly in these bull traps, where it's like, well, it came back a little bit. Maybe I can at least recoup some of what I could have sold at the top. Now, to me, it all comes back to awareness of the hobby and the hobby growing versus short-term investor speculators looking to make money versus like the fact that our incomes are going to go up, our kids are going to come in the hobby, like there are a lot of those things to think about. And then also these other hobbies had resurgences where, although those comic books or these types of things dipped quite a bit or came back to a more, we could say, normal, because again, that's still a doubling in price, to go back to my initial point on that Charizard, for anyone who had it 40,000 if they were
I mean, I would push back on that one pretty hard. I don't think that's even remotely feasible. I mean, let's just think about like market cap and the numbers real quick. So you're saying that out of everybody that's invested into it right now, that collectively they don't have a financial interest for protecting their own to, I mean, how many copies could feasibly be available, right? So you say there's like pops at like low 100s, right? So we'll say 50% of that, which I think is a very high estimate, could feasibly change hands in the next few years. I think that's an extremely high estimate personally, but we'll say 50%. So we got like 50 copies of this card, right? At a $250,000 valuation, you're only talking about a market cap on the total of the card that is at, don't want to mess up my math, but I believe it's $12.5 million, right?
Okay.
So you're saying that the holders of the cards.
So why didn't everyone try and buy them all out at 80,000 a year ago?
Well, I mean, for starters, one of the most popular or most famous people in the hobby is sitting on like 10.
Yeah.
So people did do that to an extent. But I also think that the investing is like the value of the hobby and like the value of these cards is scaling with the income and scaling with the access to investable wealth that the target demographic of the hobby has.
Our wealth didn't change in the last year.
My wealth has gone up over 1,000% in the last
because of Pokemon cards. But my point just being that the target audience's wealth, when we think about like our age, right, getting more money outside of Pokemon, I don't mean the money in Pokemon staying in, but we need money from outside to come in, right, for these prices to go up. So I think that the thing with pop culture collectibles is it's whatever someone's willing to pay, and so much of it is how connected we all are, and it's a belief about the value and us all coming together and being like, it should be worth this much. Just to some degree, that I think that is what it's about. But I do think that if the psychology around Pokemon changes, if a lot of people get really bored of it, if a lot of people want to move on from it, and you see people selling lots and lots of things at much lower prices, it's possible that people at the Charizards just won't want to sell. But I think that if you see lots and lots of cards come down a lot, it's weird. See, to me, it's not so much that I think that is going to happen, or I think that that's more likely to happen than it to continue to go up or stabilize somewhere in the middle. I think it's strange to me, just from being through bubbles and being through cycles and other sorts of things, and like looking at these other fields, it's a little strange to me how bullish people are. And my question to them is, I was buying up like 5, 8, 10 copies of all these PSA 10 first edition cards when they were like $100, $150, right? Like a lot of these, because I was like insane value when I like compared to other collectibles. So for me, I saw the value there. I also loved them and was happy to just like own a huge piece of history. It was like, I own like 10% of this card. Like, this card is like a huge part of my childhood. And Pokemon to me matters a lot. And I believe in Pokemon. I think the brand's incredible. All these things, I'm sure we're in agreement, on these sorts of things. And so I'm not, if something is going to hold its value, I mean, in the card space, which is a whole nother thing, will cards continue to be strong, and will people continue to want cards? Because we've seen it move in lots of areas. Pokemon is fantastic, touches so many people. It's much broader than Magic. But I do think that that it's important to keep in mind how human psychology can shift very quickly. And so for wealthier people, it's like, absolutely buy those cards, but buy them because I would say because you really like them. You really enjoy them. They mean something to you. And with the hope that other people are going to continue to feel the same way. It's not something that needs to be very valuable. like it doesn't have qualities to me that is going to be like, it's completely irrational if this ever goes down. Let me put it that way. Now I do think that in order for those types of cards to go down, like that card to go down, you're also going to have to see it be dragged down by like 6s, 7s, 8s. And you're also going to have to see there just not be like enough wealthy interest. And there's like that card to me, it's not going to be, to me, it would have to be a real implosion of the hobby for that card to go down. And not so much, that card is not only low pop at 121, but is the set card. but I do think that's possible. So I'll stop going on and repeating myself.
No, that's all good. I think that there's just a limit to the usefulness of like the doomsday scenario, and that I agree that it is feasible. We should definitely acknowledge the existence of risk. There is an inherent risk that all of this is speculative, and that makes it one of the riskier types of investment too. I mean, this is a speculative investment in a children's playing card, and that should not be disregarded, right?
And it's the same thing as vintage sports cards. I believe in Pokemon as a historical thing. You know, this argument that sports cards are better because they're of like a real person. It's still like a cardboard thing of, you know, I don't know. I think that these
I trust Charizard's PR a whole lot better than I do any person's, you know?
Yeah. Particularly these modern things, which is the crazy prices on these modern sports cards. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But and for me, it's not like, I don't want to be and you're not mischaracterizing me, but I think that I can be mischaracterized as like, I'm this doomsday person that I think these things are going to happen. For me, it's just balanced to be like everyone's sort of like, well, it's going to go to 1 million. Like almost everyone I hear, and I'm like, maybe we'll see. We'll see if people are still interested.
A strong maybe. I mean, I know that a comment was made recently. Was it that it shouldn't be over $200,000? That to me just comes off as sort of, that's kind of like a joke. I mean, that's because, I mean, this is a card where if it went down to $100,000, I could spend $10 million and buy nearly the entire population of the single most desirable card in the hobby by like breadth of appeal. I would do that right now. I personally would do that right now. So
why weren't you doing that a year ago?
I didn't have that much money a year ago.
Well, you have the money from Pokemon.
I mean, but that's the thing, right? I mean, I invested in small cards, and then that has led me to investing in bigger and bigger cards over time. And I've been actively investing in Pokemon cards and buying and selling Pokemon cards for over a decade. You know, I've been around for an extremely long time, very involved, and I've put every single penny that I have into this every single year for over 10 years. And so, that's been beneficial to me. But also at the same time, you know, it's my business, and I'm tied to that in a way, right? This isn't money that I can take and blow on something stupid. I can't do that because I depend on that much money moving through the business so that I can peel off a fraction of 1% so that it can continue to sustain, but then I can pay myself a living wage, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that one thing that sort of the naivety of not you, but the hobby in general is that I think that we struggle to understand how much money moves through businesses to generate an income, like a small amount that somebody can live on. And, you know, like the hedge funds struggle to produce for the majority of the population. I mean, obviously, if you're somebody with $1 billion that's in preferred shares, you're in a different world, right? We're talking about like normal people, like can struggle to produce long-term gains that are going to offset inflation and then also pay for them to live off of. Like that's a big burden. When people are talking about the amount of money that you need to do that, you're talking about literally over $10 million, probably over $20 million. If I wanted to retire right now, I would not feel safe with $20 million in an investment account. I don't think that would pay with no job, literally no income. And, you know, you're assuming that you're going to get cancer and you're assuming that all the worst things are going to happen, right? I mean, you can't hedge against that with that small of an amount of money. And, you know, you look at a lot of like the biggest industries, like I was, you know, don't quote me on this number, but I was reading an article the other day about like restaurants, and they were saying like fast food restaurants, like on average have a 13% net profit. Like that's the profit that they're working, and that's on the product before labor, which is insane. I mean, that's like, you're talking about tiny margins, and like a local restaurant has to push over $1 million a year. Like, and that's, so, I mean, really you're talking like just to stay alive. So yeah, I mean, you're just talking about amounts of money that I don't think that the average person who's on the employee side of a business, they don't see the finances of businesses, understands sort of like what's at stake there and how much money is really being done in sales around them with a car lot and a restaurant or whatever. And so then you take that same and you make a business out of Pokemon cards. And it has to push the same numbers. It really does. And so,
Mm-hmm.
it's like David Adams announced, I think it was last year, they were like, we spent $39 million buying collections this year. That's not a flex. That's just what it takes to maintain their small group of employees,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how much money is moving through the hobby. So you're talking about, again, the market cap being, like coming back down to $25 million even, which
Mm-hmm.
would be a $200,000 valuation for the most valuable card. At this point, there's just too much attention. There's too many people with that much money and that much interest. And yeah, I mean, we can pin that on however we want. And we can say that it's outside money. We can say that it's new investment. We can say that it's the growth of people's incomes over time. We can say that it's just the way that the money has trickled up from people who were invested broadly in small cards. When I was buying WotC mint from the box, commons and uncommons for 5 cents, 10 cents, and now first edition base set commons and uncommons in the same condition are $50 to $100 a piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's in a sense, it's luck. Yeah, it's definitely luck. I mean, it was huge risk at the time, and the dollars have increased, and that's why I'm not part-time anymore. Now I'm full-time in it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like for me, the confidence to buy all those cards came from my love of the cards.
Yeah,
Talking to other people who loved them, knowing how important it was as to me when I was a kid, and looking at these other markets and looking at when these sort of, rather than these like linear growth that collectibles experience, this sort of cyclical growth of just lots of people coming in, getting excited about something all at once. But it's could I see a lot of that interest leave and collectors leave? Absolutely. Could I see a lot of the businesses leave in a sec? They would leave in a second because they don't have a connection. So for them, it's all about the money and the profit and the growth. And so I'm
pivot into other things, whatever they want. A car lot can't suddenly do container shipping. It just doesn't work that way.
But like DA Card World, you see them drop their crazy prices on Magic, not buying any more Magic. I mean, you see suddenly these types of things shift. Now, to me, it's just a public service announcement in some way to put this stuff out there and just be like, collect what you love. Understand how much these things have gone up in a short amount of time. And when things go up that intensely, to me, it's a weird thing right now that how quickly those prices have sort of been like accepted and that they won't ever go down again. Or it's going to be like triple, quadruple higher in another couple of years. And it almost goes back to the first thing you said, where you were like, well, a doubling returns are great. We need to get used to that. And that's sort of what I bring it back to here, because again, a doubling would have been 80,000. Mm-hmm. And to me, if I really were to predict, do I think it's going to go down to 80,000? No. I mean, I think that would probably be pretty stupid money to put that at Vegas right now, unless you were getting like a really good odds. But if I got like 100 to 1, I definitely would put my money on that, at 100 to 1, And now what probability would I put on it? It's stupid. I mean, I have no idea, right? It's nonsense to me. But what I do know is that, and have seen in other things, just, my dad's a financial advisor, and we talk about and also invests in fine art. And we talk about the fine art market and the amazing emotion, people you have to, it's so difficult to be rational and stick with numbers, because the emotions and the intensity of the moment where everything seems so great or seems a certain way, and then how quickly that can shift. And when it shifts, people are being far too bearish, right? Because the same thing that had the same principles and capability to take off like it did, because Pokemon will always have that capability to connect and take off again, and to hit another huge spike as well. So to me, it's sort of like it has the capability of both. I mean, when you're a business, it's not so much about, and your business isn't necessarily long-term investing, but sort of, selling into the market, selling at margin. I think all of this stuff is different, and you have to figure out how to kind of flow with it, prepare for it to some degree, and so for you, as a Pokemon business, so
Yeah.
A big part of your Pokemon business is Ludkins, correct? Is grading, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, grading is a huge part of my business,
In
and
general.
marketing is a business in my portfolio that I am best known for, and I would definitely say that it's a big part of my identity in terms of what I do for the hobby.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So you do that, but and then you're also a big collector and seller, correct? Do you
Yeah,
do?
absolutely. I mean, I'm a huge collector. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. That's
Yeah.
why I'm in this instead of something else, right? That's
Oh, I know you're super passionate, and
I
you and I,
love
like, we
cards.
both
Yeah.
love the trophies and want some of those trophies, and so I guess where I'm coming from with that is trying to understand or just get to know you better too about, like, for you, do you care most about the grading in terms of financially? And feel free to not answer anything that you don't want to. You absolutely don't have to. Do you feel like is that where most of your focus needs to be in terms of your upkeep and your business, or is most of your focus on selling, or is it equal, or like where do you and buying? Like, are you actively trying to buy new inventory because you need to flip it? Like, what does your model
Right.
look like?
Sure. So I would say that in terms of everybody I know, I probably have one of the slowest models of anyone. When when I buy a card, I have no intentions of selling it within the first 2 years in most cases, and so in that sense, I am very much a speculator on future hobby and like the culture and how much demand there's going to be in the future. And so yeah, I would say that I don't know how to answer specifically the whole, like, do I focus on selling or do I focus on grading? I have to sell because if I don't, I would not be a business, and I have to and I choose to grade because it fits my model well. But I also, grading is not the only thing that I do, but it's a pretty significant portion, and I just like grading. I mean, in general, I think that a graded market is a more equitable market. It's a more accessible market. I think that, and I've spoken on this before, if people have seen other interviews that I've done or articles, I talk about how grading is really good for everybody, because for big businesses, it extends sort of the period of investment that people have in the hobby. So if you send off a card to grade, at the beginning we said it could be a year for bulk right now. So, somebody that sends off a card today is far more likely to be invested in the future if these are the time frames that it's taking. But if it's like something they can just do and then like get it right back, then, that kind of fits the fad dynamic. So I see it as sort of like a sustainable thing, but I also think that it's good for individuals. I mean, individuals are largely bad at determining the condition of their own cards and bad at representing those. And so I remember a market where grading was not even 1% of 1% of the market. I was involved in that market, and it was tough. I mean, you dealt with a lot more returns, a lot more upset, angry people. Ironically, the costs are a lot higher than people represent them, because they'll say, oh, well, this card, that's $1,000 now, but it was only $50 back then. But the reality was, in order to get the one in the condition we wanted, sometimes we had to buy 10 copies, and only one of them was actually in the condition we wanted. So, grading's not a fad. I mean, grading has really established itself in tons of hobbies out of a legitimate need, because people just aren't good at telling if their stuff's real and what condition it's in, right?
I think it's established in our psychology as collectors. I think it's such a smart idea of making something more collectible by creating rarity and scarcity where there may not have been.
Yeah, or at least parsing it out and making the rarity and scarcity obvious. A pop report is
that's
analysis that we could have never done on our own, right?
Yeah, that's a better way to put it, because the item really is rare, that it is a gem mint quality, but having the case around it allows us all to see that, and then brings our attention, and we can say that together. That's true.
Yeah. And that's why, and there are times that the system breaks down. I mean, we were laughing. We've laughed at 2 cards today that were bad examples of 10s or whatever. But even so, I mean, I think that that's a knowledge that we have largely because of the role of grading. I mean, because now that everybody's involved in grading, essentially everybody is interacting personally with professional assessments of the conditions of cards, which is crazy. I mean, it just makes everybody smarter. It makes everybody better for it. So
what I've worried about with the grading this year, and this will be really interesting to get your perspective as someone who's like so knowledgeable and does so much grading, obviously, is like where to me the grading mania, if we want to call it that, or I think the genuine interest, but interest that may not continue, or it may not continue forever, is I think that there's a lot of excitement and novelty around getting a graded card. I remember getting my first graded card, and it was just like, it was really exciting. It was fun. And I didn't really like care that much what was in it. So, you know, when I first started, it was fun, and enjoying that process and learning about it. You know, there's so much pleasure and enjoyment in that, you know, for me.
It's comparable to opening packs, you know, very much so. It's like, what results am I going to get? And then, you know, you have big hitters and not, but it's like, it's almost better in a way, because it's like with opening a pack, you have blind luck, right? And you're tied to that. Whereas we can like influence it. And if we do a good enough job, our returns will be even better, you know? And that's a very enticing process. It makes you want to keep going and keep doing it, because you're like, I'm getting better. You're seeing tangible results. So I like that. I love that. It's a lot of fun. I have no interest in opening packs. I find opening packs boring, and I don't really enjoy it at all.
Interesting.
It sure is a rare position to hold in this hobby.
That is pretty rare.
I love getting returns.
Yeah, I mean, I like opening modern. Vintage I can't, because it's just too painful. I just like too much about the money that I can't, like, I'll like, maybe for like my wedding, like Rafi and I've talked about, like, we're gonna like splurge and buy me like my favorite Neo box or something, if you know, and you know, if there are any left, right?
Right, yeah. You're talking about gambling. That's high stakes. You're talking about like, if you win, you make like $1,000, and if you lose, you set a car on fire, right?
Yeah, exactly. Best case scenario, I'm making like basically my money back. Maybe, you know, if I like happen to hit like an unbelievable 10 on like, you know, T17 or like Lugia, I like somehow like made decent money, but
it's not gonna happen.
It's absolutely not gonna happen. Be lucky to get a 9, you know.
Right. I mean, it would literally make the news, right? I mean, it's like the first PSA 10 first base Charizard in almost 2 years, right? Yeah. Like, it was news.
So where I worry about the mania of it is because it's so fun to do. I think that people are easily falling prey, like easily susceptible to like, it's also an investment because it's fun. And I think Pokemon in general has that problem. I think opening packs has that problem in terms of like, there's a gambling addiction and a buying addiction that comes in this hobby a lot. And I think that a lot of things I'm concerned about them being investments. And maybe people are saying that it's an investment when, you know, to justify doing it when they wouldn't otherwise. And to me, I'm concerned about just the mountains and mountains of graded modern cards we're going to see like in 5-10 years from now, and who's going to want it, you know, who's going to want it all, and how many of these people are going to be looking to unload them. And as someone who grades like so many modern cards, like, what do you think of sets like Evolutions, like grading, like the you know, at least those are basic. I mean, the arts are obviously, the demand's huge, but you know, let's talk about like Evolutions a little bit with that, if we could. Some of the big ones. Let's talk about like Hidden Fates. Right. Maybe like give a little insight too on like Vivid Voltage, like Amazing Rare, like some of the stuff that's being sent in now. Like, what do you make of all of it? And do you feel like these things are smart investments? Do you believe that people should do this because they, like I do, I send some of these cards in because I hope that they're probably going to retain their value, or at least be worth something to someone, but also because I like it. I really love it and enjoy doing it. But what do you think about people, you know, starting with maybe some of the crazier stuff of people who I've heard are saying these things are going to be worth like $5,000 to $10,000?
I don't think that's the case. That is not where I would place my faith. But I would say that generally speaking, we probably have several more years in terms of like seeing a large number of slabs with no demand. I think that
Yeah.
the interest in grading is still much, much, much higher than the supply of slabbed cards.
Yeah.
So I think that in terms of the idea that like you can't lose money, I mean you can, but you pretty much have to try. If you're picking a desirable Pokemon, if you're picking a pertinent set, and you're grading that on bulk, I mean, you're talking about $8 to $10. Very easy to get that out, especially when you're talking about like having the bird in hand. I mean, when grading is taking a year, if you have the slab in hand, people will absolutely pay you a couple extra dollars just to get it already in the slab and not have to go through that process themselves. So that generates a real value. And I think that for a long time, we will see people continue to value that. And I think that,
and that's a big shift. One thing I want to note there is that's a big shift from like a year ago, even, a year and a half ago, because, for those of you who are newer to the hobby, I was buying like PSA 9 level X's for $12, $11, so, and, fairly vintagey cards, I was buying like Power Keepers, like the EX cards from Power Keepers for like $15, $16 in PSA 9, right? We were getting, you could buy Jungle Fossil Hollows for $30 in PSA 9 first edition, $40 in PSA 9 first edition. So what's happened is things have gotten so expensive now that it's created some room, I think, to grade modern in a sense, when before, outside of the Charizard, it's like, why would you spend $30 on that on a rainbow rare when you could get, and there were people who did, but when you could get, a first edition Jungle Hollow, for a little bit more, for $40, $50. I mean, even when things were starting to heat up, I was still buying them at $50, $60. And so, yeah.
One of the things I say a lot, and this is kind of like one of the like catchphrases I always fall back on, is that a view that I have is I do not believe that graded is a market. I believe that graded cards are a subsection of existing markets. So I believe that you would have a vintage market, you would have people looking for vintage cards, and you would have a modern market and people looking for modern cards. I don't think that the people who are interested in a Rainbow Rare Buzzwole GX are ever going to say, graded or not, that they would rather have a Jungle card. Like, I just don't think that people make decisions that way. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that'll be so much a problem. But I do think that there's a legitimate question, which is that like the short-term increase in prices that we have seen because of the lack of supply of graded cards potentially has misled people into over-investing in grading modern, because modern itself is a less proven market. I mean, just by nature, it's the less proven market, right? So I do think that's a risk. I think that that's definitely one to watch out for and just be smart when you're going into it. But still, I mean, when you're coming out on the other side, I mean, really just managing your expectations is a big thing. If you paid $20 for the card and $10 to grade it, are you okay with getting $32 or $35? Yeah. $2 to $5 premium, I think that you could absolutely see that at the quantities that these cards are going out. I don't think you'll have any problems. I've seen, you said you wanted to talk about like hidden fates and evolutions. Please. Evolutions, I wouldn't worry about. I mean, the Charizard got hyped for a minute, but I almost don't want to talk about the Charizard. I want to talk about everything but the Charizard, just because that I think Charizards are their own market. And they follow their own rules and they do their own things. So within evolutions, I mean, you have a lot of the iconic hollows that are going to have value. Absolutely, they're going to have value, and I think that getting those graded, as long as you're talking about mint cards, they need to be getting 9s and 10s. If you get an 8, that might hurt a little bit. That's the kind of thing you expect to get from like a mystery slab or whatever. But yeah, you're talking about like mint cards. There's going to be demand for those. I do see a lot of people dumping commons and uncommons, reverse hollow commons. Like you can grade any reverse hollow from evolutions and you're guaranteed to make money. I would stick to popular Pokemon. I mean, I just don't think that I don't think blindly throwing your cards in a slab is a guaranteed path to making cash. I just don't think that's the case. And you got to question yourself too. I mean, if this is a card that couldn't even earn a $5 to $10 price tag raw, why is grading it going to make it valuable? Like, I would say that grading pulls the best from an already desirable pool. That's when it performs the best. So if there's a lack of demand before it's graded, what do you put? You're pulling the best out of what? I mean, who are you grading that card for? I think that's a question that could be asked more. With Hidden Fates, I think that's a different situation. Personally, I think Hidden Fates may go down as one of the best sets that Pokemon has ever produced. And that, I mean, just in terms of its timeliness, its distribution, the length of its appeal. I mean, literally, people are still desperately trying to get ETBs. I mean, it's like a Switch console, right? You might as well think the Switches just came out in terms of how hard they are to get, right? But it's been years. And so I think you're talking about that kind of situation where they have really successfully balanced how much they're producing to the demand, always falling a little bit short. And that's really a great situation for them too, because, you know, you create the situation where, you know, people tend to blame scalpers, which is not really what it is. It's just retail arbitrage. But, you know, they tend to blame these scalpers or whatever for buying up all of these ETBs. But I think Pokemon really, I mean, they designed it that way. You know, they created just enough limited demand that all anybody talks about is not being able to get them. And so you have somebody who, if they had a confidence in the supply going forward, would maybe only buy one or two. But now they're in a situation where they've walked into the store, they found 4, they found 8, and they're hearing everything that they're hearing is saying, you'll never get this again. This is your last chance. Of course they're going to clean the shelf out. Like, I mean, the psychology of it just pushes them to do that. And that's what Pokemon's going for. I mean, they're not making this up as they go, you know, like they've tried for years and years, and they've tweaked distribution over and over and over again. I mean, having a 5th set is novel. If you only came in 2016, you might not realize that, but that was a novel concept. The idea of releasing a set that's really targeted towards collectors, while these primary quarterly sets are targeted towards players. I mean, they're still targeted towards collectors, but, you know, they really focused on players in terms of their functionality within the organized online community, at least. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that's a novel concept, and I think that Hidden Fates is a result of this refining over time of Pokemon's release and what it's putting into it. It wasn't heavy on Charizard, but it did have a really cool Charizard, and, you know, they did a great job of making lower rarities valuable, whereas in regular sets, base GXs are worthless, you know, and you know, but baby shinies, everybody loves baby shinies. I mean, they're great and they're accessible. It's like a set within a set. And yeah, I mean, there's just so many different ways to collect the set. And I could go on forever about how I think Hidden Fates is really just like one of the best sets that Pokemon's ever produced. And I have almost none of it myself. I mean, I don't have, I didn't invest in the set really. It just wasn't my model at the time that it came out. And yeah, I mean, I'm not invested in it. I'm just genuinely saying it as a collector. I think that they hit it out of the park. Evolutions, I don't know. I think Evolutions is more of a mixed bag.
Yeah. I think that Hidden Fates was, you know, immediately popular and has sustained its popularity the whole time. You know, part of that's because it did happen in the boom of Pokemon, and we've still been booming, right? You know, so, you know, but Evolutions had a trajectory more of like, you know, was a big hit, was popular. I think when a lot of new people come in the hobby, they go to it. I know I opened one booster box of it. Didn't like it that much. Didn't enjoy it that much. I was more interested in actually seeing new cards and finding new stuff personally, but I don't think that's true for everyone. I think that some people, like, they open it and it brings them back to their childhood, and it did for me a little bit. But I also I had my childhood cards, and they just kind of felt like proxies. Like they just I don't know, and it didn't like feel. It didn't really bring it back for just me personally for some reason. But so I want to bring back something you said earlier when we started. So you talked about the focus on prices versus the focus on rarity.
Yeah.
And so I think it's an interesting concept, and particularly when we're talking about modern. So to me, I mean, price ideal in a rational market, which doesn't exist, you know, prices would equal supply and demand, you know, meeting at a point, right? Wherever that point is, you know, in Pokemon, it's crazy because one day something's selling for $50 more over here. and then $20 less over here. And there's so many factors in that, like who you're buying from, buying on eBay versus buying on Instagram versus buying on Facebook, right? Like there's so many things that change the what people are paying, onto that. But basically we're talking about, supply and demand at any point, at any given point. Although in reality, what happens is the people both selling and buying don't know what the supply is and don't know what the demand is. No one no one knows, which makes it not rational. We're not like robots plugged into a knowledge system where we have like all the math of exactly how many of this exists, exactly how many buyers are for it. So this is what price I should pay. And then everyone agrees.
If there wouldn't be winners and losers, and then it wouldn't be fun, right?
Right. There wouldn't be the competition. And, and I think that's okay. So, but going to talk a little bit more about modern here. So I think my thinking about modern is this going to be the junk wax era, or is the junk wax era like in 5 years? And this is actually going to be an era still where there wasn't nearly enough Pokemon printed for demand. And, as you put it, Pokemon didn't, because there was such explosion, and that explosion sustains itself and actually grows into the future, even if there are dips at certain times. A set like Hidden Fates just never gets printed enough and is so great and ends up being so historic, which I think it will. To me, the rarity piece is the piece of the puzzle that we don't know. And really, it doesn't matter how rare an item is if it's rarer than the demand at any one given time. Now, that's why it's supply and demand. But the danger of not buying very, very rare things is that the demand can be very up and down, on these types of items, on these types of things. Whereas on a trophy card or something like this, there are probably enough of you and me as crazy people in the world that for the rest of our lives, we're going to be hunting these things.
Yeah, if today there's 10,000 people that want an SSB and tomorrow there's 50,000 people that want an SSB, nothing will change because there are no SSBs for sale.
Yeah. So, it's going to be very difficult for there to be not enough people who want those types of things. Right. Whereas modern is just a lot more up in the air. And I think that it's been interesting too. Like Evolutions has been so interesting to me because of how quickly those booster box prices have risen. And the fact that they've basically stayed at that point. And going back to your first point, right? They are the most available. I mean, thousands and thousands available on eBay still. Like no end in sight, right? Of how many of those are. Pokemon Company probably has a ton more of that product too. They're still slipping it into things, packs, maybe not the booster boxes, whatever.
Right. And
doesn't matter so far. And to me, it's these pack opening channels are so interesting. PokeRev, of course, being the biggest, but like some of the smaller ones where they're selling these packs for like $14 all day, and then they just go online, they buy another one, they break it open, and it's people love it. People love Pokemon right now. And it's great. It's great. It also, yeah, I guess part of me loves that. And I think this is maybe the cynical side of me that hopefully is too cynical and just doesn't know what's really happening in the world and is trying to like police and protect things that aren't actually existing. But I think that for me, just watching it very closely and the forming of it, what concerned me about the whole process was like I just saw so many investing channels telling people to buy Evolutions and like all these tier lists being made about Evolutions. And to me, it was just for a box to like triple in price in like a couple weeks. It was like the last one to move, by the way. All the other ones like doubled before that one. And then the last one to move, of course with Logan Paul and all that stuff went with it. But I think the cynical part of me is sort of like just so many people had so much to gain by Evolutions going up. Like everyone owns it, owned thousands, like people own pallets of this stuff. It was sitting around. None of these businesses could dump it. None of these businesses could get rid of it. And I go onto these eBay sellers and they've sold like 7,000 booster boxes at like $430 when they couldn't give it away for 80 like a year ago. And it's just amazing. Whatever, and it might absolutely sustain itself. And the people buying it now, maybe they'll make money on it. Maybe it'll keep going up. And who cares what I think? And who cares that I know the history of it? And that makes, shies me off of it. 100% think that's true. But just as a case study, that is so fascinating to me, and more fascinating than anything else in the hobby in some ways to me, because it's just so confusing from a person who just watches this stuff very closely. The other stuff makes sense. I think that very predictable that, a lot of the stuff was going to retrace, pretty hugely. The rare stuff wasn't going to retrace as much. That all makes sense. The rare stuff didn't go up as much in price for the most part, particularly trophies and things like that. A lot of them saw doubles in prices or triples in prices when, when a lot of set cards might have seen like a 8 to 10x in price or something like that. Set cards have come down 20%. Trophy cards have continued moving up or staying the same. They're getting kind of closer, now in terms of their realized growth. What do you make of that? Were you watching? Do you care? You might just like not care about that. That's totally valid too. What do you make of that type of such a dramatic shift? Do you think it's sustainable? Yeah.
So I think that Evolutions as a case study is perhaps the most interesting and the least useful in terms of all the case studies we could do.
Okay.
It has been so erratic and so affected by just random factors that are not in themselves replicable. So, I mean, if you were looking to like devise a strategy, I would not build it around looking for evolution. You know what I mean? But it is definitely interesting, and a lot of weird stuff happened. I'll start by saying that Evolutions is something that I have learned from and watched as an indicator, just because I was completely wrong about what would happen with it.
Yeah.
I did not see it as an investable set, and for a couple of years I was right. And I was very right. But we had this influx of people into the market that we could not have anticipated, right? I mean, that's not information I had when I was originally making that decision. And the other thing too is you got to remember that when Evolutions came out, it was a botched release. Evolutions very clearly should have been the 20th anniversary set, and it wasn't. Generations was. But Evolutions is a reprint of base set, and Generations looks like every other dud set that's ever been produced, except that it only comes in ETBs, and they say 20th anniversary on the side. So I invested in Generations instead, because the indicators at the time said there's not enough people for this print of Evolutions. It says 20th anniversary on the side. It's sleek. It's not produced in a regular booster box. It's very limited supply. I mean, so I bought a handful of cases of ETBs, and I sat on them, and I did fine. I mean, those did fine, and but I would have been much better off, buying a bunch of Evolutions, and that's just how it is. But the reality is that I would never have held on to Evolutions long enough to really see those returns. And another thing too with Evolutions that makes it even weirder that it's had this success is it saw more reprints than like anything, and for longer. It was like 4 years after the set when the standard release, usually it's a 2-year cap. 2-year cap used to be the rule. 2 years after the first product comes out, they will stop introducing even loose booster packs into new products. That was the rule. And they completely threw that out. It was like 4 years of printing for Evolutions. And at this point, I don't think that anybody really thinks of that 2-year rule as a rule anymore, because they've broken it so many times it's unreal. But that held for a very long time. I mean, that was an industry standard at the time. And so we were making decisions based off of that rule that doesn't exist anymore as well. But yeah, I mean, Evolutions is just bizarre. And I think that, it is a base set reprint, but it's not. You know what I mean? Like, it isn't. It's a weird hybrid. If it had been just like a collection set of 102 cards, I would have been all over those. I would have bought as many as I could possibly justify. But it wasn't. It's like a weird hybrid set, and like you're chasing full arts out of it too, right? Which is sort of just a weird situation. So yeah, Evolutions is just weird. And if you're case studying it, I mean, you have to talk about everything. You have to talk about this weird release, the rules changing as time goes, this interest globally. I remember the first indicator to me that something interesting was happening with Evolutions wasn't domestic prices. It was that all of a sudden the price spiked in the UK, and they were like, literally, like I could buy them in the US, ship them to a friend in the UK. He could sell them on eBay, and after paying for shipping, after paying for fees, after paying for everything, I was making $30 a box. That's a crazy return. Average return on a booster box is $2. That's how much. Because that's another big thing too. Is like everybody thinks that you're going to get it cheaper from a distributor, and you really can't. So yeah, it's like there's a really hard limit on how much you can make on booster boxes just because they're so easy to get and sell. But yeah, I mean, the global markets on those were like strange, very strange.
Yeah.
And I remember when Last Call came in, and nobody believed it on the Evolutions as well, because they were like, Last Call, and it's like the 80th time they've said that in 3 years. It's like, Last Call, guys, buy these booster boxes that are $2 a pack. And pay us $2.15 when the secondary market's at $2, right? It is like a really weird situation, but there were some smart people who saw it and they said, these differentials are weird. Let's take a chance on it. And, they bought a few pallets and they did really well for themselves. But yeah, I mean, you're talking, again, just these standout sets, sort of the fun ones to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about Crimson Invasion, which put businesses completely and permanently out because it was so bad that it made a product that you can't not sell, Pokemon cards, not sell, right? I mean, it was like terrible sets, and those are mixed in, right? I mean, when you have Evolutions is coming out in an era where people are raw from you had Crimson Invasion comes out, Steam Siege comes out, something Forces, it's slipping from my mind, but you had like a lot of really bad sets around that time that were just trash, unsellable, and to this date are like, Steam Siege is still a meme, right? It's like to this day. But yeah, so I think that at the same time, like that made people wary. I mean, I don't think people were eager to sit on a lot of product that was coming out, but yeah. Anyway, that's a lot of word soup, but
no, I share a lot of word soup when I talk about when I talk about it and try to understand it. I think for me, like anomalies are always the thing I find so interesting and focus on because at the end of the day, like I'm not a business, and what drives me in this is like learning and the fun of like the game and the challenge and the competitiveness. And that's the only thing that really has surprised me this year in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously I didn't predict the huge growth like no one, and I didn't predict Logan Paul. I didn't know Logan Paul was going to come now. If I'd had that insider information, I would have probably expected us to, bounce up more because I'm well aware of him. I'm well aware of him, and I'm well aware of like how much merch he sells to his super fans and like how many views he gets. Like he's an unbelievably devoted, engaged community.
Right.
Subscribers don't matter. What really matters is how engaged and how people listen to you and engage with your channel, these sorts of things.
Membership is active membership, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the difference. And that's the hidden stat that nobody can see publicly, but it makes all the difference.
All the difference. And he has that. But outside of that stuff, I think that for me, I said on my channel at one point, I was like, all the modern booster boxes seem to be popping. Like, Burning Shadows hadn't yet. Like a couple of these ones hadn't yet. And I was like, yeah, they'll like, I mean, it would make sense that they'll double. These other ones doubled, But Evolutions would have been the one that I would have said supply and demand. I would have said just too much supply. And there is too much supply. But but they just raised the supply $300 and people are buying it. Like that's what's amazing to me. It's not like they started running low in the world or on eBay. It was just that people were all of a sudden willing to spend $300 more than they were 1 week ago for the same item that had the same availability. And so it goes exactly the opposite, right, of what you were saying in the beginning, which is like what's going to drive it, or what generally drives markets or these sorts of things, is like you don't see it as much. And when you don't see something as much, that drives that fear of missing out. But somehow a fear of missing out has been created around evolutions. And I see it in people, like a fear. And Rudy from Alpha Investments made a video about a fear of missing out on evolutions, and that he wished he had bought more. And he was dumping it for $80, $70, couldn't get rid of it. His Patreons didn't want it, and it's to me, it's a lesson on human psychology and how quick and how irrational markets can be based on like fundamentals, like supply, and that demand can just suddenly and erratically change. Mm-hmm. And that's that's huge, and it did, right? Because, I don't think it's, to me, the, simplest explanation, Occam's razor, simplest explanation is just that he opened the first edition base box. All the influencers online started talking about base set. People, tons of people discovered it right then and there. They went onto YouTube. They typed in, what set should I buy? Like a lot of people do. They went onto, and the channels were saying evolutions, as the next thing, and they bought it, and the rest is history.
I think it was a mix, though. I mean, I think that 100% was driving it, but I also think that there was sort of like an invisible thing happening, which is that a market doesn't present all of the opportunities equally. Even on eBay, you'll see, okay, listings are going from $100 to $300, right? Yeah. And you'll see everything listed in between. And I think that there was so much, or it felt like there was so much that was available at the $100 that it would never change. But I think that probably that was getting eaten up and eaten up and eaten up and eaten up. And at some point, somebody took the last bite, and now there's nothing below $300, right? And I think that process probably did happen, but it probably happened very fast, and it happened on a product that people weren't really looking at the supply. They were assuming the supply. Everything we knew said that there's so much of this supply, there's nothing we can do. It's junk product, blah, blah, blah. And that's why you have all these people who are actually using sort of like an informed analytical approach to this product missed out on it, right? Because that approach would not have driven you to invest in it. But I also don't think that them not investing in it is what made it valuable. I think it's a random series of factors that all fell in at the right time, in the right place. And that's why I don't think that it's really like a replicable case study. Yeah.
To be honest, that's my fear about Pokemon in general. A little bit this year, and that's why, as you started this conversation, and I think you're 100% right, like this is going to be a study. This, like, I talked to some of my friends in like antiques and like, different like high-end historical collector items and things like that. And they're just like, what a case study in just like markets, this huge Pokemon boom. And now everything, the whole card boom that's happening, but also like the coin market doubled, like so many things went up. Yeah, for all of the reasons that you talked about just people being inside, wanting to collect, wanting to move their money out of, being more interested in different types of assets, moving their money out of the stock market, being fearful of, as a hedge against maybe inflation because they're afraid the government's printing money, all that stuff plays into it, of course. But we can see that played into it across all these markets, but Pokemon also had a lot more happen.
Yeah, I remember, I was listening, it was Kevin O'Leary was talking about it. Actually, I believe that Zach Browning, Gem and Pokemon, that's his online name. He put me onto it. He was like, yeah, I had a chance to like ask a question to Kevin O'Leary, and I brought this up, and Kevin O'Leary's response was like, yeah, actually that's happening in the watch market right now too, and the wine market. And so it's this is all collectibles. I mean, this is very, very broadly collectibles we're seeing this happen. So that, it's certainly not, it's obviously collectibles markets in general are responding to external forces, right? Like that's what's happening. But I also think that, sure, that's the short term, right? But what's going to stick? What's going to stay?
Exactly.
And I still feel very optimistic about it. I think that modern has a lot of opportunity, just a ton of opportunity, and a lot of opportunity that allows people to compete in it and not have to compete with people who are spending $39 million a year on collectibles. You're not having to compete with those people. Those people are looking to establish trends, establish markets. They have strategies in place or whatever. And that strategy is not focusing on $4, $5 changes in modern cards. And you can absolutely build an empire on that, as big as you want to get. I mean, as long as you are willing to grind it out and focus, and that element, you got to be right every time. You got to be the best. I mean, some people are going to get weeded out naturally, and there's a risk. The risk is that you put in money and you're wrong, and that money goes to somebody else. Because that's the other thing about collectibles, is that money really stays. I mean, our ability to capture investment and keep it in collectibles is extremely high. You have like stocks, even that's an investment that what makes or breaks it is its fungibility, so that people can withdraw the money and use it for other things. I mean, that's like the dynamic is there. Specifically, we throw our money into our 401k with the hopes of taking it out and spending it on something else. Whereas in collectibles, people are buying them mostly because they like them, which is sort of a weird dynamic. I think that's why the speculative market exists. I mean, the reason that our speculative market is so healthy is because it is built on the core of a legitimate interest that is so deep and so broad and so valuable that it has allowed these small markets to build themselves on top of it.
And I would have said that we had such a healthy market a year ago, and now it's like mixed. Like in some ways it's going to be broader, and they're promising things. There are a lot of things from this year that really, really concerned me. And that concerned me about all markets. I in the stock market, very, residential, like there are things that I'm concerned about, and we don't have to go too far off and into politics and all these sorts of things, but I have lots of conversations with some of my friends, and Rafi and I talk a good amount because we're both just like, we like talking about money, and it's interesting to us. And, just talking about where we're going to put it, what are we, and I think you said actually on our channel when you did that interview with Rafi too, part of why you didn't sell was sort of like, what am I going to do with it? Where else am I going to put it? And that's definitely true. But I do agree that it's not a hard sell for a lot of people on Pokemon. Right. And I think that is very true in the sense that you might have people be like a little skeptical of, is this an investment? But it's so fun and enjoyable that they do it anyway. Whereas they would never have done that with a stock, like if the numbers weren't very good, they wouldn't have done that with a stock. And so that's always going to be there. There are very few people who I think are in this market that are, completely, have zero attachment and just view it as a complete, financial opportunity. Of course there are those people, but that I do not think it is anywhere near the majority. So
those people get weeded out naturally too, because it's, again, this hobby requires a lot of specialized knowledge to really produce a profit, and even people that are in it all the time often fail to really make much money off of it. And that's okay. I mean, that's healthy. I mean, if everybody was making money, then you'd want to be really skeptical. That's a bad sign, that perhaps this is just, we're perceiving of it as profit, but in reality, it's just the outworkings of a larger inflationary event. That's what would be happening if everybody was making money. And I'm sure you look like maybe you do have that concern, and that's
I do have some of that concern too.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean that's fine. I think that I'm sure that an element of that is true, but
I think a small element, if I had to guess, and it's all highly speculative. Two dudes talking, sharing what they think. I'm
not a financial advisor. Please don't make financial decisions that are going to change your life on the basis of what I say in this conversation with my friend. Right?
Exactly.
That's our. We should put that at the beginning of everything.
That needs to be said.
Yeah, but no, I think there's a lot of legitimacy to it. I think the market's doing a lot of interesting things, and I feel good about it. I mean, I do feel good about the market overall, and I think that I really just don't perceive of again, maybe it's just because I told you up front, I'm 2 to 5 years is really my strategy. Like when I buy things, it's with intent to hold. My minimum is 2 years minimum, and it tends to go more towards 5 than it does 2. Yeah. So that tends to be my strategy, and that's why also a lot of people that kind of like look into me have a hard time kind of figuring out what it is that I do with buying and selling, because if you look at my eBay, I think I have 7 listings right now. So it's like a very small amount, but it's mostly just that longer term strategy. And the other thing too is that you get the benefit when you like invest in like longer terms or whatever. Say you do Charizard, right? Like a really good example to look at right now would be the Illustrator Charizard that came out. I think a lot of people are like, okay, so when it first came out, it immediately jumped from $10 to $30. Everybody was feeling really good about this one. Hey, that's what Charizard does these days. Let's get some. And then they're like, we're reprinting it. And everybody's like, okay. So they stop for a minute. It stalls out at about $20. They come out again, still at $20. Okay, all right, we're feeling good about it. And they're like, we're doing a third release. That's never happened before. And the last time a second release was done, it was Red's Pikachu. And everybody remembers that one. That was a release that ended up with, I remember I was buying sealed packs of 100 over and over and over and over and over again at $2 to $3 per copy. Yeah. Right? I ended up with thousands of them, and I'm glad that I held them all because they're $100 right now. So whatever, y'all can have them. Like I don't want them that bad. So but with the Illustrator Charizard, the third print came out now. That already happened. It was the 18th, I think, of this month was when the third release happened of this card. And in Japan, it's like $12, $13, but that's going to disappear. I feel confident in that. That's a good example of a good card. And the Japanese side tends to control its rarity a little bit better than the English side does. And so what's the strat on that, right? What do you do with a card like that? For me, 2 to 5 years. I'm looking at the card. I'm looking at holding for a minimum of 2 years and then looking at the market and saying, do I want to put this away for another 1, 2, or 3 years? And making my decision based off of that. But talking limited release, if you want to buy 1,000 copies, you're really going to struggle. If you want 1,000 copies of a Vivid Voltage card, you can get it. If you want 1,000 copies of this rare promo that doesn't seem rare, that has Charizard on it, that has a cool story, I don't understand why people aren't looking at like more opportunities like that. And, I see like pretty much even just basic Pikachu promos that came out from the Japanese Pokemon centers between 2016 and 2018 are all $100. So, you have some of these like reliable things that just have churned profit for years and years and years and years. And, I've been buying like the small Japanese promos that come out, not a crazy amount, 20, 50 copies of something, which in terms of like investment is very small, right? Like you're talking, a lot of them come out at like $5, right? So you're talking like putting a couple $100 into it. And, you sit on for 2 years and almost every single 2-year period, like the market's pretty much clean of them. And so, that there are areas where things are still sustainable. Things are still calm. Like this craziness didn't really affect a lot of it. And, the closest we really got, I think, is like probably the Battle Festa Pikachu, which ironically, it's like, that's a time when, again, experts were just wrong. You had I remember E4 specifically was roasting Unlisted Leaf for saying, he was like, this is a good card. This is the most investable card that's come out in forever. You got to buy this. And everybody was like, well, I know what I'm not buying. You know what I mean? Because everybody just kind of has those judgments. Whereas if you had actually stopped and looked at the merits of the card, it is gorgeous, beautiful card. And the PSA 10s are $4,000 now. So, if you'd have bought a bunch of those, you'd be killing it, right? You'd be doing super well. And so I think sometimes sort of the noise can be misleading. I think that sometimes we have to reduce the basics and look at the merits of the card. Look at what's happening in these longer trends, because longer trends do exist in Pokemon. And it's hard to imagine in the midst of all this chaos that longer trends would exist because it feels like nothing's normal. And it seems like every 3 months we forget everything that we knew because it's no longer valuable to us. But, as grading, again, I'm going to come back to grading. I think that as grading is forcing these longer periods of time in between, I think sets which tend to be, most popular when they're released, I think they're going to struggle with that transition. I think that, except for, again, if you're talking Charizard, throw out everything I'm saying. But if you're talking about like the sets as a whole and sort of like as a mixed bag of investable pieces, I think that they're going to really struggle to transition with that. And maybe they go to someone with a faster turnaround like CGC. Maybe CGC becomes the only relevant company for modern grading. I don't know. It's certain, though, that people are not going to wait a year forever for an affordable grading option on modern cards. That just doesn't make sense. But maybe promos, because, again, promos are one of those factors that, they're popular for longer, but they have a smaller number of people interested up front. And so you're kind of like competing in a very different space with very different rules. And I've seen a lot of people do really well for themselves sort of in those spaces. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of look for the stability amidst the storm. I think that I would caution people from getting too worked up about it in either direction, either believing that we're going to the moon or believing that the moon's crashing into Earth, right? I don't think either of those things is really happening. I think that there is a lot of excitement, and excitement presents opportunity, but the opportunity isn't being aware of the excitement and then making your decisions underneath it, right? So.
Yeah, no, there's patience, being calm, trying to, check your own emotions, check your own biases. I made a video early on the channel just talking about the 5 most common mistakes I see people make, including myself.
Yeah.
And, in business and in investing and all these sorts of things. And that's what, to me, it comes down to, is understanding, trying to have self-awareness, understand your biases, learn from your mistakes, understand what happened with that, Festa Pikachu, for example. What happened in these cases. Part of why I'm so interested in evolution, it's like what led that to happen. And then when you learn that, you can better recognize that pattern. So much of it is about that pattern recognition that comes from experience, from doing it, from being super engaged, but also being humble enough to acknowledge mistakes and acknowledge things that you missed and didn't see, and try to hear other people's perspectives, listen to people who were buying that and their reasoning and what was going on. And you may still not agree, and you may think that they got lucky or that it was stupid, and that's okay too. I mean, the reality is that and people may not agree with me on this, but this is how I tend to view markets, is that some people do make money on very sort of like rational supply and demand type principles and reasons, and they're value investors, and I think that that's the safest way to go. I think that's the way that you tend to do the best over time. You might miss out on some of these momentum investing hyped opportunities, but that's the best way to conduct, to compete, I think, for the long term, the most stable way. But there are going to be plenty of times where, you completely, because of that, you completely miss out on the momentum, on the hype of something, or you're so in the numbers that you just don't see that people just like it. They just love it. The demand is endless, and you should just watch Unlisted Leaf and like chill out, man. Just like go with it and enjoy it. But as you alluded to, and I've said too, I think a lot of that is the fun. And, one place I want to take this is, there's this sort of idea of like being a collector versus being an investor versus, it's like you can't love and enjoy the cards maybe, while you're also like doing all these like financial business calculations. And although I think that it can be a struggle at times for me to try to separate those things and like also just have time like appreciating the card and like being a little bit more of a kid, not being an adult who's like interested in all the logic of the market and studying the market. That both of those things are very true for me, in this hobby. And I get a lot of enjoyment from learning how markets work, learning how pop culture, this is my first experience really investing in and being super engaged in a pop culture collectible. I studied other ones from a distance, but it's my first experience. And so this will be invaluable as I start to move into other things too, and look at other collectibles. And also, I mean, the majority of my savings and my money goes into things like stocks. And for me, that's just where I think it will always be. And in part because I'm not good at selling my collectibles. Like I'm not, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that, but it's, I'm not, I like the dividends. I like putting my money in stocks that I believe in and just putting them and just having them in there forever. And even though maybe if I'm, I might, maybe I have maybe I have a talent for investing in collectibles or reading these markets. Maybe I just got lucky. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle. But I think that even if I could make more money by, liquidating more than I did to kind of get into Pokemon and get into something like Dragon Ball Z, which I'm very interested in right now.
Dragon Ball Super is a very, very nice TCG.
Yeah, and I'm interested in Score in the vintage, in part because of how Dragon Ball Super is doing. And I think eventually those things are going to be more linked, and people are going to be more interested in those. And other people are having that idea too, because as Pokemon has been going down, Dragon Ball Z has been doubling. I've already doubled my money on things I bought 2 weeks ago, like a month ago.
Probably that supply thing too, where you're just dealing with a supply that can dry up a lot faster, right?
So little supply. The rarity is insane. And the cards are freaking awesome. Like talk about just like when I got those cards for the first time, I was like, oh my God, the same feeling I had when I was buying those Pokemon set cards and getting those crystals and shinings for the first time, just like I never was able to get this as a kid. So hard to pull, now as an adult, I can hoard these but yeah. So, how do you manage, as we sort of maybe enter into wrapping the conversation up here? How do you manage being both a collector and passionate about the cards, while also managing psychologically, emotionally to sell and to be a business? Or is that part of the not putting a lot on eBay and the not selling, and why you like doing the graded business, because it's you're not having to sell your cards? What's that like for you?
I mean, to be clear, I mean, I have a collection room, and I've never sold anything out of it. So yeah. I'm very, very good about setting barriers between what is a piece of my collection and what is inventory. Yeah. So I think that now I often find myself receiving back chunks that were intended for inventory, peeling off a handful of cards and sticking them in my collection room. That just happens, right? But that filters one way. That's not it's only permeable in one direction. I mean, things go in my collection and they don't leave, and that's sort of something that I'm really passionate about. And again, that's a big factor of it's like, why didn't you buy a PSA 10 first edition base set Charizard, right? I mean, there's levels of comfort of how much money I was able to take out of my business and put into a room that I have no intention of selling, right? Yeah. So that's not to say that I'll never have a life event. But even in life events, I mean, I've been through some major life events, right? I mean, the people who have followed sort of the stories that I've told on E4 and stuff is that, I come from extremely humble beginnings, right? I went to college only because I got into two colleges, and the one of them was had a little bit better reputation than the other, but they wanted $2,000 a semester, and I wasn't confident I could come up with that because I had nothing. I mean, my parents have nothing to this day. I mean, my parents have extremely limited income and no wealth. I mean, they have nothing. They have no retirement. They have no house. The only car they have comes through my dad's job. So, my parents are very, very humble people, and I lived with them not long ago. I'm only in my 20s. So, this has all been sort of a sudden thing. I mean, it's been something that I've been kind of thrown into. And in a sense, I think that's also why I'm not invested as heavily in things like stocks and personal property. I do own a house now. But, ironically, I mean, how did I pay the down payment on the house that I live in? Selling Pokemon cards. When did I sell them? At the end of last year, and I would have been a whole lot better off keeping everything I sold, but that's also, I only pull out when I have a specific thing that I want to put it into. And, I fund my Roth 401k, now it's a Roth 401k. I funded my Roth IRA until I was no longer eligible. And so, I mean, the Roth is the most basic rudimentary sort of thing where they're if you do nothing else, do this. But that's the only thing that I really did, and I only started doing that 2 years ago, right? So it's that's been a very small part of my life, and I wasn't brought up with any emphasis whatsoever on investing money because my parents didn't have money to invest, and so that definitely colors sort of the decisions that I've made. And, that's part of what, my inability to sort of trust those systems really pushes me towards collectibles. It's something that I know I've been in. I can exert an undue amount of influence on this hobby compared to what you would be able to do like in the stock market. Like if you decide you want to change the stock market, you can't. There's no way. Like you could spend your entire life trying to, and you'll never. I mean, you could be the most successful person, and you could be Jeff Bezos, and Jeff Bezos's effect on the stock market is minimal. You know what I mean? In terms of like the whole stock market, right? Whereas if I want to make cards, if I want to draw people's attention to cards, I can do that. Like I can, and maybe how much effect that has on like aggregate demand is questionable, but it's certainly more by percent than what I could do to generate aggregate demand at a penny stock, right? So yeah, I mean, I like that. I like that relationship, that proximity or whatever, and the tangible nature of it. And I think that a lot of people that are putting their money into it also feel the same way.
Yeah.
People like having their value in hand. It's the same. I've seen a lot on like Instagram, for example, a lot of people that get really into Pokemon then turn around and they get into like gold bullion, right? Which is sort of like a weird hobby and a weird crossover to be into, but it really makes sense if you think of, where a lot of the collectors come from. I don't think the average person is coming from like a very heady investing background. I mean, I think a lot of it are just normal working class people. But really, even though it is normal working class people, it really does self-select for people who are financially more successful on the more successful side of that, because you do have to have disposable income to continuously put money into the hobby. And I think that it's sort of finds its weird niches, the hobby does. But
yeah, no, interesting stuff. Yeah. I mean, it makes me, particularly the earlier stuff you were saying, makes me think of, invest in what you know, the sort of cliched thing that's said. And I think that I think that that's very true. I mean, I think that the fact that this is a very unestablished market, that people like you and like me who are, particularly you're in your 20s, but, I'm in my early 30s, are, someone like you's been in it a very long time, right? A lot of the people who've been in it the longest outside of, Gary E. Birdman, some of these older gentlemen who
into it, right? So it's like, 25, yeah.
It honestly, from a competitive standpoint, breeds an amazing opportunity for the people who came here first, because there's so much less competition. There's such a knowledge gap. There's a crazy knowledge gap. And listen, I mean, if people were worse people, they could take advantage of it even more, in a lot of cases. Like I'm entering in this like DBZ score market, for example, and I'm trying to, I'm dive right in there, reach out to the people with the biggest collections, try to get everything I can possibly, ask every single question. I have the advantage of coming from Pokemon, and so I know that, and I really, study this market, I know this market well. And so there's, similarities and differences, but I had a leg up in that sense of what to ask or what to look for. A new person coming into the hobby, I mean, it's not for a lack of intelligence that they don't know the rarity or like what they should buy or who to listen to. I mean,
nothing's intuitive. Everything is learned knowledge.
Exactly. And when you have lots of different channels and lots of different people saying different things, it's confusing. And of course, we don't have established print runs. We don't, there are extra copies and trophy cards, and nothing is what it seems. There's, who knows who's telling the truth, who's sitting on what, all of that is a reality. And of course, the reality of any market. But it makes it challenging. And those are interestingly both give you, or people who are experienced and also have the connections and the networks, a humongous advantage, but also creates a problem within the market. And I think that there's sort of an interesting thing where, like in DBZ, one of the major reasons I think that market hasn't exploded as much or nearly as much, because it should, in my opinion, based on the fundamentals, is because people don't know what to buy and don't know about it. And it's channels like Scott Pratt's channel, like Rusty's channel, like, although they were giving information for free, that information allowed people to feel comfortable enough to make purchases.
Mhm.
And so it's fundamental in building up a collectible hobby for experts to share information and be trustworthy or trustworthy enough for people to be like, I could spend 50,000 on a freaking piece of cardboard and have any hopes of getting any of it back, and 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 so Pokemon has done a really good job with that. And a lot of the people who established the market, like, these people who not only established the price points because you guys were selling and were selling intelligently and were intentional. They're a smart group of guys who know what they're doing and are very intentional about what they do in terms of building markets. And these other markets I look at, like, they're primed for someone to come in and do that, to be completely honest. And I think that is an under. I think that people talk about how Pokemon, it's just Pokemon that did it, but it's also the community and the sharing of knowledge, and that makes it trustworthy enough or feeling good enough that people were willing to so easily spend $200,000 while being here for a little bit. That's a crazy amount. These other, like, things like coins and these other things, like, rare books, like, much more difficult markets to get in and feel comfortable. Like, I'm not going to freaking get completely destroyed and scammed.
Anticipating demand is a lot harder, especially when you're talking about stuff that has hundreds and hundreds of years of diversity.
Yeah.
That's tough, and we're like over here, like, English or Japanese?
Yeah.
Coins?
Like, not to mention just like
language that's never existed, and some that don't.
Like the incredible historical knowledge you need to feel comfortable in one of those hobbies, adding to, like, the terrifyingness of fakes and frauds and forgeries and not knowing who to trust or where to start. It's
Pokemon
just
is shockingly protected from. I mean, really, I would have, people years and years and years ago, when the market was much smaller, were talking about how, like, these are going to be faked and it's going to destroy the market, and it hasn't happened.
Now, the danger of all of that is the reverse, is that because it's so easy to come into, there are a lot of people who may not be that serious, and you don't have to actually, like, compared to those markets where, like, if you're doing enough research to buy those books, you're probably in that market for the rest of your life. I mean, you have to be like a crazy person, but one of these, and I'm a crazy person when I talk about just people who are just so passionate for knowledge and history and a hoarder of physical items, and certain people are like that. Whereas in Pokemon, it could have just been like, it's easy, it's so much quicker. Now, of course, it's there's a ton to know, and it's challenging and it's difficult, and there's a huge knowledge gap also. But comparatively, and this has always been true about pop culture collectibles in general, and why the masses tend to be interested and involved in those. They grew up with them, they engage with them as a kid, they have a connection to them, they intuitively understand it because they collected it as a kid. They know what makes sense to be the most rare, almost intuitively. And to a certain extent, so I think that it'll be super interesting to see where all that ends up. So I think we should probably wrap it up for today.
Yeah, this is my final remarks then.
Yeah, I was going to say, please.
I think that I think collecting is an innate thing that at least a subsection of people do. And so I think that manifests in different hobbies, and that manifests in different ways that we do things. And, maybe it's your grandma's knickknacks, right? That's still collecting, your grandpa's coin collection, your dad's comic book collection, your brother's sports card collection, like, go on and on and on and on. And I think that's not going to go away. And so all you really have is the intersection of the pertinence of Pokemon to the global culture, which I think is in a great place, and it's moving forward great. And I think a lot of people get caught up in this boogeyman of, like, the rich investor who's coming in and buying up all of your cards that you've been saving all your life for and making them disappear. And that boogeyman just doesn't exist. So, I mean, I think that the game, while it is accessible, and you're right that does make an opportunity for people to get in and get out very quickly, if you're focusing on sort of the longer term trends, you're focusing on the 2-year, the 5-year, those types of situations, you're going to be protected from that in a lot of ways, because you're not going to be susceptible to these short blips in the market. And if you're smart and, you again, the term you used earlier was like a value investor, right? I really appreciate that, because I think that is what an honest collector really lends itself toward, because I'm not going to invest in something that I wouldn't collect, like that would be ridiculous. And so, I think that the people who have really established themselves in the hobby with rare exception are people who love the hobby and they're trying to do good things in the hobby. And, I've never had a business interaction with the hobby that I didn't think also made it better. And there are lots and lots of ways to make money in the world. And when you're talking about bringing it close to home, you're talking about doing it in the realm of the things that you collect, people are going to lend themselves towards being open about it and doing it in a way that also sustains the hobby itself. And people are smart, and I think that, one of the things you said was, we tend to put all the cards on the table, right? We tend to be very open, and all the people, for the most part, that I know that I really respect the depth of their knowledge are very open, and they, maybe they're busy people. I'm a very busy person, but I go out of my way to make space to contribute and to do articles and to do interviews and to continue sort of a conversation in the ways that I can with the community at large. And so, that's one of the reasons I really appreciate what you do, because, people like you and what you're doing, you connect sort of the busy people, right? And you make it so that a conversation is always happening in both directions between the broader community and the people who are sort of operating in this very specific niche that we like to talk about. So I really appreciate, what you do, and I really appreciate the conversation today. So thank you very much for that. And I think that all of the optimism is not unfounded. I think I'm still feeling good about the market, and I know that we probably have another difficult year ahead of us in terms of like the everyday facts and the everyday life. Coronavirus isn't over, and my heart goes out for the people that lost friends, that lost families, that lost loved ones, and more practical levels too, that lost jobs and that were affected by market changes and all this thing that happened. We're definitely going to come out of this in a different place than we were when we went into it. But I think that in terms of the Pokemon world, I think that as a value investor, as a collector, I think that the fundamentals haven't changed. I think that the biggest people and the smallest people in it still love it. And I think that there are a lot of years of new people to discover how cool what we do is and have a chance to be exposed to that. And I think that a lot of them are going to want to be a part of this, because ultimately I still think that we're doing really cool things. I think that we're in glory years of Pokemon now. I don't think that's in the future. I think that's the best sets and the best events and all of the best things that will happen that will really define the experience of collecting are happening like right now and still developing now.
Yeah. I think, one thing I guess for a final thought, and then feel free to respond to it.
Yeah.
I do think that this year has been very, very different than any other year in Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
And the one argument that I don't agree with is sort of like, well, we've seen this cycle before, we've seen this amount of interest, and the naysayers have always been wrong, and so they'll be wrong again. That type of thing. I really am on the fence. So I, play devil's advocate in a lot of ways to the people I have on, and because almost everyone's bullish, I tend to be playing the devil's advocate often of a more bearish position or a more moderate position. But I'm actually going to have someone on, I think, who's more bearish, hopefully, and then I'll probably play some of the other. But for me, just personally, I'm really on the fence. I'm an anxious person when it comes to trusting other people's interests. and trusting that other people are going to sustain their interest in things, and that we can really accurately predict what people are going to be into and human behavior. I'm a lot more trusting of numbers and of history and of things I see in other markets than I am just like exuberant, what investors will call irrational exuberance that I felt or saw this year, and to me, it's I would be extremely relieved if like prices just stay the same or like continue going up a little bit, because I don't want to sell my cards and because I like them and I care about them and value them, and although I would not buy them at these prices, absolutely wouldn't personally. They're not that valuable to me anymore. I also am not selling them, which is obviously an irrationality in me, right?
Yeah, that's mildly contradictory, but
but it's because I'm a collector, and collectors are irrational. It's part of the problem. If these were stocks, I would sell them, but for me, I have a fear that I might not get that the market might go up and I might not get them back, particularly the rare items that I have, which most of what I've held are the rare items,
right?
And one, and two, I'm okay with losing money on them. They're collectibles. I enjoy them. I love them. And the hassle of like timing the market, if I think it's going to go down, is also just like,
anyway,
it's impossible. Right? It's stupid. You can't I can be like, yeah, I think it's overvalued. I think there'll be a correction at some point. Where that is, when that is, I have no idea. Bubbles and booms can last 5-6 years. I mean, when you say the 2 and 5 time, we could have a 5-year cards are a fad and all cards continue to go up and continue to do really well. And it becomes like, and we may have seen, we might be watching the news next year and they might be talking a lot about Pokemon and a lot about these and more awareness. And you might see people who didn't collect them start getting more into them. And generally the sign of a bubble is actually that. It's not when collectors are investor types.
Paces organic interest, right?
Yeah. And so that's what that's the message I would leave people is, and who knows, right, where that is, but it's looking for that. And when we've seen other bubbles in history, that's the main thing, where it goes from that awareness phase to the mania phase of like, when someone who's never thought about Pokemon Jam in their life is like, ooh, maybe I should do this, and that's similar to what happened in crypto. People in crypto were buying crypto who didn't even know really what it was, had no interest, had no specific interest in it, didn't think it was a particularly good idea, and now collectibles are act differently than those sorts of things.
Yeah. But there's some overlap in terms of like, yeah.
The psychology of markets is an overlap no matter what it is.
Right.
Even if collectibles add some differences in terms of the connection and emotional connection, and of course like liquidity and all sorts of things that actually are a stopgap for panic selling.
Highly illiquid in our hobby, which is something crazy to think about.
Yeah. So I want to say first of all, like, to my audience and for myself, like everything you say, I would definitely highly respect and take in, as useful and honest opinion of someone who has a ton of experience in this hobby, has a ton of stake in this hobby, has helped build this hobby, and as I say to my, on my channel all the time, it's, feel free to disregard my concerns, my anxieties. I disregard them sometimes. I don't know what's going to happen now. And I'm really on the fence about where we are in that awareness phase. And to me, it comes down to two things. It's like, are we in a bit of a are we in a bit of a bull trap, where we're going to actually see corrections down to sort of that double, where everything doubled instead of still quadrupled right now, or are we going to, or is the demand enough that really what happened, it was just the less rare things that really corrected hugely, and these new price points are actually going to establish themselves quite resiliently and really surprisingly. And it's amazing that, all these cards are, to me, I mean, it's really unbelievable that even like, though the Crystal Charizard, for example, went from 24,000 to 14,000, for example, I bought mine for 2,500 PSA 10 6 months, no, now 9 months ago,
Mhm.
8 months ago. I mean, and at one point it was 24,000 in 9 months, 10 times on a card that expensive. How many people can really afford that? It's amazing. That's not 10 times on a card that goes from $10 to 100, and what the Charizard has done to get to 350K. I mean, amazing, truly amazing. So it's really a treat to be a part of it. And I'm happy to be a student of it, honestly, and a student of yours and a student of the other people in the hobby. And I think that going through these things really makes you a smarter investor, smarter, more savvy person, whether you're sort of end up being right or wrong, or how right or wrong you are about these sorts of things. So that's sort of my final take, but I do want to leave you with the last word if there's anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say to remember in general for anybody that's watching, listening to this conversation, that I think has presented a lot of sides to sort of weird, because I would say that we're very different people and we have landed in very different places, and we are definitely coming with unique approaches, but we're looking at sort of the same things. And I would encourage people to look at it in the context of a much broader history. Trading cards have been around for over 100 years, and we have everything that we know has been in a fraction of that, and it's been recent. And I think that the salience of trading cards is ongoing. I think that non-sports cards is a natural development to trading cards. I don't think it's anomalous. I think that it makes a lot of sense. I mean, non-sports cards have a long history in themselves. Yeah. With some of the earliest trading cards, yeah. Had as many, famous Native Americans and presidents as they did sports people. And I
just bought my girlfriend's father just bought him his cards from a kid. He owned like the Civil War cards, the top Civil War cards. So.
Yeah, I mean, Topps was really big into non-sports inserts. So, yeah. And I would also say that I think that they're in a nuclear situation where we do see maybe a complete erasure of all of the gains from the last 5 years, which I think is really sort of the worst that we can imagine. Pokemon still exists. It's still, and there's still opportunity that exists within that. Comics has already died, and yet it lives. Sports cards have died many times, and yet they live, and they're reborn. And
absolutely.
People they engage in them in different ways, and the rules change, and what you do financially with that changes. But I think that if you have a genuine interest in it and you're making smart choices and you're willing to put the time into it, and I'm talking 10 plus years. I mean, I'm talking like if you really want to see the returns that the people that you covet that they are seeing, you're talking about a long time in it. And that's okay, because I think that when you choose to take on the financial dimension of Pokemon, that you should be doing that in conjunction with a lifelong interest in the hobby. And I would encourage people, especially people who find themselves sometimes struggling to grapple with, financial motivations as they relate to sort of their hobby motivations, their interest motivations, like you, where you have like, I wouldn't buy these cars today, this price, but I also wouldn't let them go. I think that's natural. I think that's great. Yeah. And I would encourage people to continue building on a base of a collection that's off limits. Everybody should have their collection room, just like I do. Maybe that's not a room. Maybe that's a shoebox. Maybe that's a binder. Maybe it can be whatever you want it to be, because there are no rules. Again, all the rules are freeform, and that's why cowboys thrive in this environment, right? I mean, those cavalier personalities that take chances tend to be the ones that do really well, and that are willing to just kind of ignore the conventional advice and say, you know what? I believe in this card, and I'm going to buy 1,000 of them. Like those are the situations, and you don't have to be a genius in every situation. You don't have to be a genius to know that you should have bought 1,000 Scream Pikachus. You know what I mean? And a lot of people did, and it didn't matter. Didn't matter one bit, because it's just a great card, and sometimes the fundamentals can really come through. But make sure you're having a good time too. If you're not having a good time in the hobby, then I think that'll affect your returns absolutely. We'd like to talk about money, but the reality is that the scarcest thing in the world is time, and hobbies demand a lot of time. It's the only thing that you can never replace, and you never know how much of it you have. So if you're not having a good time, don't do it. But I think I'm having a good time. I think that you're probably having an okay time. I think that a lot of people are having a good time, and I think we'll continue to have a good time. And in a lot of ways, we are passive observers to either our own success or our own demise, because whatever happens tomorrow, the only thing I know is I'm going to wake up and I'm still going to love Pokemon cards.
Very good. Thank you so much for coming on. And I'm sure we'll, talk again, have you on again in the future. And, we'll continue these debates, these back and forths. And I think that there's a lot of value.
For sure. Well, I appreciate it, man.
Take care. Happy New Year's to you.
New Year's, everybody.
And to the audience, Happy New Year's, all you guys. And I hope we all have a healthy and happy year this year, and that we can love and enjoy Pokemon as Charlie said, and continue to love the hobby and be supportive and of each other, and that also in the world and of course, like world events, things are brighter and things get better, that we can continue to grow and move forward, right? So thank you again, and we'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
See you next time.
Take care.